Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper and extract the important articles and look at it from the point of view of prelims as well as the mains exam. At the end of the discussion, I do suggest and advise all of you to go to the Telegram channel and also practice the MCQs associated with all these topics in order to assess your level of understanding. Now, today in total, we are going to have a coverage of around 9 different topics of varying degrees. So, the first 3 topics which have appeared in the editorial section, that is, respect the health rights of India's children, that is associated with the deaths of number of children which have been observed over the past couple of weeks owing to the faulty cough syrup which had been consumed and which had been prescribed by the doctors. So that is associated with GS paper 2 in terms of the regulatory aspects and GS paper 3. Then the mirage of port-led development in Great Nicobar. Now, this is an article which again talks about the Great Nicobar project and whether all the positives that are being talked about in terms of the benefit arising out of the Great Nicobar project, whether that can fructify or not. So, this is relevant to GS paper 3. Then, sanctioning Russia. Now, this is a small op ed piece which is following Trump's action against Russia and the sanctions which have been imposed on the Russian oil companies. Now, how effective they can be is what the article is about. This is associated with your GS paper 2. Now, few of the other articles we shall be considering from the point of view of your prelims perspective. The PM Shri mission. Now, what is that? After Kerala government has finally blinked and has agreed to sign on the PM Shri. So what is this PM Shri about? Then cyclone is developing in the region of Bay of Bengal. That cyclone will be named as Cyclone Montha. Now, which is the country which has given that name, provided that the full development of the cyclone does happen. The naming of the cyclone is what we will talk about very briefly in this. Gyan Bharatam mission in order to conserve the manuscripts available with the various different institutions and the universities. So, what is that Gyan Bharatam mission? Private sector activity reaches to or eases to a 5 month low as per the PMI cycle and the PMI survey. And RBI may limit banks' market exposure in order to reduce the vulnerabilities. And US sends supersonic B-1 bombers, some of the most effective bombers that the US military has off the Venezuela coastline. This is again a tactic of United States in order to exert pressure on Venezuela. Now, before we start the discussion of the topics, for all the candidates who are aspiring to be civil servants, you have to be aware about the importance of test series and how important it is to practice the questions, especially the MCQs, in order to ace the prelims examination. Now, keeping that in mind, we are conducting the Unacademy Civil Services Championship test. Now, that is slated to be held on 26th of October, that is tomorrow, at 11 a.m. and at 5 p.m. Do participate in the test. The link for registration is provided in the description below. And if you do perform well, which I'm sure you would, you do stand a chance to win many lucrative prizes. Now, having said that, we come to the topic of discussion, the first topic of discussion, that is respect the health right of India's children. Now, a couple of weeks ago, just to give you the background of it for those who are unaware, a couple of weeks ago, the world and obviously India woke up to the horrifying news of many children actually dying due to the intake of a cough syrup, which was prescribed by a pediatrician in Madhya Pradesh. Later on, inquiry provided the information that the pediatrician would receive a commission of around 2.5 rupees per bottle of that cough syrup. And that was one of the reasons why that cough syrup was prescribed. So that means the price per life of of a child in our country is pegged to around 2.5 rupees. Had the children not been consuming those cough syrups, they would have very well been alive even today. Now, this is despite the fact that the regulators and the health ministry had also flagged the sale of these kind of cough syrups owing to the issue of contamination. And various different batches were also flagged. But despite that, you had the sale of these cough syrups and the consumption of cough syrups. Now, this brings to light a larger issue of drug control and management and approval in a country like India. When we talk about drug control and management in India, we have to understand that we have various different regulators who have different responsibilities associated. Now, much of the attention right now across the various different media channels, news headlines, etc., has been focused upon fixing the blame that who is responsible eventually. But we also have to use this calamity as an opportunity to understand the larger systemic issues which do prevail in our drug approval system. And while India prides itself and calls itself as the pharmacy of the globe and pharmacy of the global south, there are multiple blemishes that India has to basically ascertain and India has to take care of. So, first things first, what about the regulators? Who are the ones who are responsible for providing the regulation and providing or handling of the drugs? So, first of all, the CDSO, that is Central Drug Standard Control Organization, which is placed under the Directorate General of Health Services, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, that handles large manufacturers of drugs and export approvals. Now, this is the organization responsible. For example, if let's suppose I have a pharmaceutical company, tomorrow I open a pharmaceutical company or a drug manufacturing company, I wish to establish an export channel. I want to export those drugs to various different other countries. Now, who will provide me with the approval required? That is CDSCO. Okay. Now, state drug control officers, they handle the regulation, care, manufacture, sale, and distribution of drugs by small and medium scale manufacturers. So that is why a lot of attention is actually focused on the state drug control officers. But we have to understand one thing. When it comes to children, children are oftentimes ignored in terms of our overall focus on health improvement and health delivery. When we talk about the drug development, a new medicine which is being developed, there also children are not oftentimes at the center stage or at the focus. We have to keep one thing in mind, that India is a youthful population where almost 39% of the population is below the age of 18 years. That is the demographic dividend that India hopes to capitalize in the coming decades. And not having a separate plan for this larger population in terms of drug development and drug delivery is definitely a kind of a loophole that India has to bridge. Now, just to give you an idea about how the drug development happens, how the approval is received, because many of you would have this question in your mind, that how come such faulty drugs are provided with an approval? So, I will give you an idea about the drug development and the drug delivery when it comes to the global norms and the global standards. But before that, we touch upon an important concept which has been highlighted in the article, that is the concept of therapeutic orphans. What do we mean by that? That basically means that any drug development which happens. Now, in that drug development, you basically have the case of clinical trials, which are an essential part of that. Now, what do we mean by clinical trials? That is, once the drug is considered to be safe. Now, there are various different ways in which you consider the drug to be safe. How do you do that? So, one thing that is done is, first of all, it is experimented with animals. Once you have some amount of success rate with the animals and all the various different chemical compounds are considered and deemed to be safe, after that the drug proceeds for clinical trials. In the case of clinical trials, you have various different volunteers who basically some of them suffering from certain diseases and so on. Now they are administered with the drug and their progress is monitored very carefully under controlled standards. Only after it has got some efficacy, it has got effectiveness, and it is seen to be curing the population, only then is that drug approved. That is the global norm. But in the case of majority of the drug companies, the clinical trials are conducted on adults. Why? Because the adult is the target population for the pharmaceutical companies. It is the target population. But what about the cough syrups, the medicines that you have for children? How do they get developed? So there is a kind of an extrapolation which is done, that if this much amount of drug is required by an adult, a healthy adult, what would be the dosage required by a child? So that is where, from the clinical trials, extrapolation is done. Now, that extrapolation, what it does, it oftentimes ignores the fact that a child's body is very different in terms of how it reacts to a particular compound as compared to an adult's body. So, what is referred to as the pharmacodynamic characteristic of the drug, that is, in simpler terms, how the pharmaceutical compound reacts with your body. So, that is ignored. So, extrapolation is done and then it is provided to children. So, that is one of the major issues. That is, you don't have a separate clinical trial, no separate trial is conducted. Okay. So as a consequence, what happens? Oftentimes, these children, they are at risk in terms of how that drug can react in their own body. So this is a major issue. Other than that, there are other issues, systemic issues that our country also faces. You see, a country which is burdened with out of pocket expenditure in healthcare, the World Health Organization estimates, give us an idea that you have majority of the out of pocket expenditure that a family incurs is on healthcare. That is something that they spend upon. Now, in that situation, and when you are, let's suppose, not a very developed country, you are a developing country, a large amount of poor population, affordable drugs are something which are very much required by the larger population. In order to get that drug affordable, to keep the prices in control, what is done is that WHO, World Health Organization comes up with the essential list of medicines, essential medicine lists. Now, these essential medicines which are provided in the list, that should be provided at a very cheaper price. So, this is also again extrapolated as essential medical medicine list for children. What is known as EMLC, EMLC with a C in small. Now, you have EMLs for adult population also. You have EMLs for children population or child population as well. Periodically, this list is updated in order to ensure that the health requirements, the health demands that are being met at an affordable price. But when we talk about the essential medicine list for adults, now that is regularly updated by WHO, and WHO pays a lot of attention to it. Regularly updated. Right. Whereas when we talk about the EMLC, that is for children, it is rarely updated. Rarely updated. Which means what? Oftentimes, the older formulations which are provided, that continue to be sold over the counter for a longer period of time. And that exposes the children to a greater amount of risk going ahead into the future as well. Now, over the counter sale is one of the other issues that our country faces, particularly when we talk about the urban areas as well. Now, many of the medicines which are oftentimes prescribed by the doctors, now that is where the prescription is provided, now that is considered to be the safe medicine. But other than that, also, many of the parents, the guardians, they are in a habit of simply buying some of the medicines from the medicine shop without consulting the doctors as well. That exposes them to a greater risk. Without knowing the drug formulations, without knowing the essential medications, that is where the children are exposed. So there needs to be multiple different reviews which are required at various different levels in order to get rid of of this problem. Now, in India, we don't have any such separate trial requirement for drugs for children. But what is the condition, or what is the situation abroad or across the globe? So when you take a look at the conditions across the globe, in European Union, you have the Puma, not the animal, not the clothing brand, but pediatric use marketing authorization that regulates or encourages pediatric formulations. Right. In US, similarly, you have BCPA, that is Best Pharmaceuticals for Children Act. Now, such legislations provide incentives for carrying out the clinical trials and development of separate drugs for children. Now, it is understandable why Western countries don't invest too much in drug development for the children population, because there they have an aging or an aged population. But when we are dealing with a youthful population and a youthful demographic like India, we have to ensure that there are enough regulations, there are enough methodologies and processes in the way in order to ensure the clinical trial and the clinical development of drugs separately for children. Now, India as a country prides itself and calls itself as a pharmacy of the global south. Now, in such a scenario, such kind of incidents which happen within our country, that tars and tarnishes India's image as a pharmacy of global south. We also have to understand that such incidents of drugs causing death, that is not only restricted to India alone. There have been various different cases of India's export of drugs causing damage and even deaths, particularly cough syrups, in regions such as Gambia, in regions such as Indonesia. They have already, Uzbekistan is one of those countries. Indonesia, Uzbekistan. Now, in these countries, there have been multiple mishaps which have already happened. Okay. Now, why do they happen? This is because of lack of quality control, lack of QC, as it is referred to as, or lack of quality control. Now, when we talk about quality control, this needs to have a regulation, a regulatory fix. That is, you need to have a transparent regulatory mechanism where each and every test or each and every inspection is documented. So that is where we need to have better and a transparent regulatory approvals that are required. Okay. So without this, what can happen? Think about it. India is a country which is known for manufacturing of generic drugs, right? So such kind of drugs which do not have any specific chemical formulae, but rather they are used. They don't have a proprietary ownership of a big company, but they can be used to cure diseases available at a cheaper price. But if these generic drugs, they gain a bad name across the world in terms of causing multiple deaths rather than curing the diseases, who will buy any drugs from India? The case in point here is the example of China. China, post COVID, developed a vaccine that was named as Sinovac. Now, that Sinovac basically was supplied for free to many countries in East and South Asia. Now, those countries who basically used that Sinovac vaccine for the larger population found that the efficacy is very, very low. As a consequence, the Chinese drug companies, they suffered in terms of their credibility and their export in other drug markets as well. So it is a long-term impact which is faced by the pharmaceutical industry. So pharmaceutical export in our country, that is very important for multiple reasons. Why? Because this also keeps the domestic industry going, the domestic industry alive, right? Because of creation of demand. So that is a major factor. Other than that, it is also important to provide cheap drugs. Provide cheap drugs for the developing world and for the underdeveloped population across the globe who cannot afford to buy medicines from the costly pharmaceutical companies across the world. So that is why India's export is a cornerstone in terms of development of curative practices across the globe. In such a scenario, we cannot ignore such kind of lapses which occur time and time again. Now, we have to keep one thing in mind when it comes to the child population. Ensuring a healthy and and a nutritious child population is something that is provided to us and guaranteed as per the directive principle of state policy. Under Article 39F, that is something which is also covered. 39F. That is the directive principle of state policy, where the state has to secure the child's nutritional status and standards. So, in such a situation where we have been formulating multiple laws for the conservation and the best practices in children, so you have the National Child Policy, you have various juvenile acts, and so on. All of them are largely targeted across the areas of workplace, sexual exploitation, and so on. But when it comes to their health and in terms of the drugs, that is where that is a sector which is oftentimes ignored. There is obviously the large amount of and large influence of the drug mafia, which also plays a role. But that is where the government intervention has to come into play. So, what is the way forward? The way forward is establish child specific pharmaceutical legislation like the BPCA that you have in the US, mandate clinical trials for pediatric formulations under safe ethical supervision, strengthen the drug regulatory ecosystem, which is present from local manufacturing to even export standards, expand the essential medicine list for children, and regularly update it as well. Integrate health rights of children as a core part of India's public health policy. Other than that, holistic framework in order to ensure the manufacturing and the quality standards, whether they are met or not. Education for caregivers and pharmacists on proper pediatric doses. We have to understand public awareness is a major requirement in this. Because when we talk about children, they are very young. They cannot take a decision regarding which kind of medicines to consume or not. They are dependent on their guardians. Now, what if the guardians themselves they are not aware about the safe consumption of various different drugs? They continue to buy antibiotics. They continue to buy dangerous drugs from the over the counter. So that is where education for caregivers and pharmacists is important. That can be done by public awareness campaigns. Stricter regulation for over the counter medication, that also has to be provided. So these are various regulatory and the practitioner cure which can be done in order to get rid of this issue. Okay, only then can we ensure that the safe upbringing of the child population in our country can be ensured. We have to understand one thing. This is not the first time that such an event or such an accident has happened in India. It is just that the public memory is very short. If you have been following news for the past, let's suppose 10 years, 20 years, if you look at the archives of the newspapers as well, in the various different stories in the newspapers will be filled with such news headlines of multiple people getting blinded by the consumption of a particular drug, multiple people dying because of a faulty drug, multiple people again getting impacted due to certain worms being found in the drug. All of that tells you that there is something very wrong in how we treat the drug manufacturing. We are taking our role as the pharmacist of the global south for granted. If we don't provide quality, nobody will buy our product regardless of how cheap we sell it. So that is why quality assurance is a must. And for that quality assurance, the control over manufacturing facilities in terms of the regulatory oversight, that has to be maintained. So that is the only way forward that we can conjure up. Okay. Now, uh, but sir, from consumers' perspective, is cheap pricing a determinant? Is it right to infer the cheaper, the lower? No. Cheaper in price does not mean that the quality has to be poor. Cheaper in price is basically because of easier chemical formulations and the manufacturing in bulk. That is why the price is cheap. Now, does not mean that the quality has to be poor. Quality can be ensured while still ensuring that the prices are cheap. So, this is clearly a lapse in terms of regulatory oversight or in terms of what the inspections have been done. Okay. Now, let us take a look at the practice question. India's role as the pharmacist of Global South is at a great risk due to incidents abroad and domestically. Comment. It is a 10 marker question. Now, in this 10 marker question, how do you write the answer? So, in the intro, you talk about India's role as the global pharmacy. India's role. That is what you highlight. Okay. Now, this is where you have to talk about how India has become one of the reliable global exporters of cheap and affordable drugs for the larger underserved population in various different demographies of the world, in various different population sets of the world, from Central Asia to Africa to Latin America to South Asia, and has provided accessibility to better healthcare services across the globe. So that is where you talk about it. Then in the body portion, you talk about the challenges that we face. In this, you have to talk about the faulty medicines, the inefficacy of these medicines. Then you have to basically also talk about the various different export related issues. Here, you do have to mention about the accidents or the tarnishing of the image as well. Okay, image of the country. Give the example of the countries which have suffered from this: Gambia, Uzbekistan, Indonesia. That is something that you can mention. After that, you talk about way forward. All the way forward that we have listed, that is something which can be listed here as well. In the conclusion, you have to talk about the importance of the pharmaceutical industry in our country. Importance of pharmaceutical industry. Pharma industry. Where you have to mention pharmaceutical industry in our country is a revenue generator as well as a large job provider. For the well-being of that industry, it is very important to adhere to strict quality controls and regulatory mechanisms. Only then will we cement our place as the pharmacy of the global south. Like that, you can talk about it. What if the burden on our economy, providing more money and then tax? No. Basically, please understand, most of you are thinking that you have a kind of a perception where you are thinking that if we manufacture quality drugs, then overall the price will increase. No, it is not the case. The same drugs which are being manufactured by some of the manufacturers, some of the producers, there are various different officers, state drug officers, who are in charge of carrying out regular inspection checks and so on. Now, all that is required for them is to do their job more effectively, weed out the corruption. How do you weed out corruption? It is not something which can be wished away. Corruption can only be weeded out if you are transparent. That, let's suppose, in camera inspection is done, each and everything is recorded on tape as well. So if these smaller measures are taken, then whosoever is a producer will produce the drugs of better quality. Let them increase the prices by 2 rupees. The government already provides subsidy on some of the basic drugs when it comes to the various Jan Aushadhi centers, etc. So it is not the case of increasing of tax burden. It is not the case of increasing of the drug prices. It is the case of whatever you are manufacturing, manufacture it with a proper intent and with a proper kind of mechanism. Okay. Now, then we come to the second article, the mirage of port-led development in Great Nicobar. Now, Great Nicobar project has been in news for the past couple of years owing to the development of that project and the various different hurdles which have come into their way, owing to the destruction of the natural ecosystem, the displacement of the tribal population in the region as well. Now, the region of Great Nicobar, that is an island which forms the southernmost tip of the Indian territory overall. Now, situated at a latitude around 6 degree 4 minutes north. Now, that is very vital in terms of the global sea lanes as well. That is why India wants to develop a port in that region. Now, India says there are various different strategic advancements and the strategic advantages that a country will gain having a port in that region. And also, there are other such developments planned in the region of Great Nicobar. But the article basically argues that all the advantages that are being talked about for the Great Nicobar project, that is simply up in the air. That is not something which can be realized. That is not something which can be materialized. So that is why we have to relook at the Great Nicobar project, provided that it is already risking the ecosystem of the region, the natural vegetation of the region, the endangered species, and also the displacement of the tribal population. So here, first of all, take a look at the Great Nicobar project. What is Great Nicobar project? What are the various components in the Great Nicobar project and why it is considered to be strategically advantageous? So we'll consider the positives, we'll consider the criticism, and then we can formulate our own conclusion. So under the Great Nicobar project, there is a proposal for four major developments to happen. If you take a look at those four major developments, at the region of the Galathea Bay, here you have the International Container Transshipment Terminal. Now, what is this transshipment terminal about? How is it different from a general port which is developed? So you have to understand that various different ports, they have different capabilities in terms of handling what is the overall bulk cargo that arrives at that location. So let's suppose you have port A, or if you can take a look at the background image here, let's suppose you consider Colombo port. Now here, larger ships will come to the Colombo port, they will offload their goods, and the smaller ships from here will carry the goods to various different regions. And the larger ship then goes back. Right? This is what is known as transshipment, that you take larger bulk cargo. Okay. So, what is transshipment? Transshipment is basically where larger cargo or large bulk of cargo is offloaded right at the port. Then after that, transferred into lighter and smaller ships, small amounts transferred to smaller ships, and after that, these smaller ships, they move to different other ports. Move to different other ports. So that is what is transshipment. So that is being sought to be developed in the region of Great Nicobar. Presently in India, we don't have many deep water ports. So larger cargo bulk ships, what are known as the Panamax class carriers, they don't even come to the shores of India. Virinium port is one of those deep water ports which have been developed in the region of Kerala. Now, other than that, you don't have many of these deep water ports. So the present practice is that larger container ships, they come to either Singapore or they come to Colombo. So Colombo or the Changi port in Singapore. Now there they offload the cargo, and from there that cargo is brought to India. So India ends up paying lot of revenue, lot of tax in transportation of this cargo, which increases our logistics cost overall, makes the imports costlier. So what India seeks to do or is seeking to do is development of these transshipment ports in the region of Great Nicobar so that it can take away the business from Colombo and Singapore. So that is one of the reasons and what one of the purposes. Other than that, an international airport to be developed in the region. Other than that, you basically have the township area development. Other than that, a power plant. So these are the four parts of the Great Nicobar project. Now, obviously, there is the economic aspect or the economic advantage which is being cited here, but there is also the strategic angle which is being cited. If you take a look at the location here of the Great Nicobar and the Galathea Bay, mind you, if you take a look at the previous map carefully, the Galathea Bay and the region of Great Nicobar is something which is teeming with biodiversity, has got a lot of biodiversity. You have the Galathea National Park also, you have the Campbell Bay National Park as well, situated in this region, where you will find multiple different bird species also to be present. In the coastal area, you will find lot of coral population to be present as well. These developments will impact the coral population. Here, you will also find the Shompen tribe, the particularly vulnerable tribal group which resides in this location. So, the construction activities will always lead to the displacement of the tribal population as well. Now, the government has earmarked the separate land for the displacement, as it is saying, but still, the displacement of tribals is something which is never desirable. Now, if you take a look at the strategic location, now this region of Great Nicobar lies in the international shipping route, very close to the international shipping route. So that is where the assumption is that India already has a Virinium port which has been developed in Kerala. So this will serve as another transshipment port which will take the business away from Colombo and even from Singapore. Other than that, there is the navy angle which is also brought into the picture, that it is so close to the region of Malacca Strait, the region where you basically have the Chinese navy coming into the Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal. So here, development of a port can be used for defense purposes as well, for monitoring purposes as well, and that is where it can provide a kind of a check to the expansive nature and the expansive intentions of the Chinese navy. So there are advantages which are being cited. There are disadvantages which are being cited as well. First, let's talk about the advantages. What are the advantages being cited? Advantages. So amongst the advantage, you have the economic angle, economic, and that is transshipment port, shipment port. Okay. Then other than that, this will also provide boost local economy. Local economy. Then other than that, you have the strategic advantage. Strategic. That is, you also have an airport which is being developed and port. Now, strategic or a kind of check to Chinese ambitions. Okay, a kind of a check to the Chinese ambitions and the incursions which do occur in the region of Andaman Sea and the Bay of Bengal. Then, other than that, extracting business away, extracting business away from Colombo and Singapore. Okay, these are the advantage. But then the article highlights the various disadvantages as well. One is obviously the biodiversity. Biodiversity. In biodiversity, you basically have the corals, for example, which will be impacted. You have the leatherback turtles, which come to the breeding ground, that is Great Nicobar region. So leatherback turtles, that will be impacted. Then you also have one of the prehistoric species which are found, that is the horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs, they will also be impacted, right? Then you have the tribal displacement, which will also occur. But then this is something which has been cited for a long time as a kind of a disadvantage. The article argues that even the economic angle is something which is doubtful. Economic. How? Because the development of a port does not happen overnight in terms of the economic profitability. Even in Sri Lanka, we have seen that you had the Colombo port, you had the development of the Hambantota port. Hambantota port did not pick up. Even the Colombo port has got limited availability of the larger container ships which take berth or take refuge in the Colombo port. We have seen in our neighboring country of Pakistan, development of Gwadar port has barely got 7 to 8 ships coming throughout the year. Many of our Indian ports also, they have limited amount of economic benefit. So for the development of a port, what is required for the not only the development of a port, but rather the economic benefit to be coming out of a port, you need the backward and the infrastructure linkage. Infrastructure linkage in terms of rail connectivity, road connectivity, and so on. You also need the logistical movement, the goods which will be offloaded. You need a logistics park to be developed, or a container depot which needs to be developed, and you need large storage spaces as well. Okay, so you have storage space that is also required. But even despite of these two, it is not necessary that a port will automatically be economically viable. You need to have multiple agreements with various different companies, various different shipping companies. Now, once that agreement is in place, only then will the shipping containers come into that port. Otherwise, they will keep on having that agreement with Singapore, with Sri Lanka, and they will keep on berthing at Colombo and Singapore only. So, you basically need to have agreements in place. Agreements in place. Now, there is also a counter argument here that unless and until you construct a port, why will a company have an agreement with you? For that, you need a port in place. Now, the article has here highlighted the case of the Virinium port development. Virinium port, as you would be aware, is considered to be an economic success despite multiple protests in that area. While the construction of the port was happening, that port has witnessed large number of ships berthing into that port and providing the economic impetus. But the article argues that almost majority of the ships which are coming to Virinium port, they are of the private company MSC, the global giant of shipping containers, that is MSC, the Maersk liners that you have. And the reason that MSC is targeting and providing multiple ships coming to Virinium port is because MSC wants a share of ownership in the Virinium port. So unless and until you are offering something like that in Great Nicobar port also, you won't have multiple ships coming into that region. So without the agreements in place, number of ships will be doubtful. Number of ships coming into that will be doubtful. Then, in the case of operationalization of a port, you need fuel, you need various different raw materials to be provided, isn't it? You need transportation. Now, mind you, that Great Nicobar is not connected with the mainland of our country. It is very far off. So it is almost isolated. So, even providing basic infrastructure like fuel supply and so on can turn out to be a costly process. So, in the case of Great Nicobar, the isolated isolated location that can basically make operation costly. So that is where the economic benefits are in question. Then, the article has also argued that even when we talk about the strategic benefits in terms of providing a check to China, now, if you are seeking to do that, you cannot be seeking to do that by development of a commercial port. You should develop a naval port capable enough to house the naval warships, the naval submarines, and so on. And you already have a close by naval station, that is INS Baz. INS Baz already carries out the surveillance activities, the reconnaissance activities in that region. So the construction of another port, which is not the naval port, defies all the logic behind it. So that is where the strategic intent is also under question, because you also have INS Baz. Now, here again, you can put a counter argument that see, development of a port can be a kind of a side tactic. Meanwhile, India bolsters its naval services. Right? You have the case of the Cochin port, you have the case of the Vishakhapatnam port, the Vizag port. All of them, they are dual purpose ports. They are used for both defense as well as for civilian trade purposes. So something like that can also be done here. But nonetheless, the article argues that China has not made its intentions clear, that it basically wants to come into Bay of Bengal. So unless and until China does make its intention clear, till that point of time, we should not have aggressive posturing. Now, what my personal opinions are, it is not the time to highlight that, but that is the argument and the counter argument associated with the Great Nicobar project. As a candidate for civil services, you have to be aware of both sides of the argument and be well prepared to present both sides of the argument if required. Okay? So, here, if you take a look at the type of question which can be framed, critically analyze the importance of development of a deep sea port at Galathea Bay, 15 marker. It is a critically analyzed question. So you basically have to criticize this as well as provide the beneficial aspects. But what do you write in the intro? In the intro, you talk about the details of the Great Nicobar project. Details of Great Nicobar project. The four proposals: airport, power plant, township, and even the port, Great Nicobar project. Okay. Then after that, you talk about in the body, the advantages of the port, first of all, of port. Then talk about the challenges or disadvantages or disadvantage. Okay, because it is critically analyzed, this portion has to be bulkier. This portion you have to pay a lot of attention to. In the conclusion, what do you write? You basically have to write about that India does require the development of strategic ports. India does require development on economic infrastructure, but that can never be done without proper attention to the local environment and the local population as well. Okay, so that is how you have to provide the conclusion. Okay, now then sanctioning Russia. Now, what US has been doing is that in recent times, and this is something that the previous US administration under Joe Biden also struggled with, they are seeking to put an end to the Russia Ukraine conflict, which is not turning out to be easy. Now, the allegations from NATO for a long period of time has been that when we talk about Russia's aggression into Ukraine, now that is largely fueled. Where does Russia get the money from? There are multiple sanctions, and recently European Union has imposed the 18th round of sanctions on Russia, including the technological supply, financial institutions, and so on. So where does Russia get its money from? So Russia, it is alleged, is getting its money from oil, and that oil is provided at a discounted rate. Now, this oil, which is provided at a discounted rate, is being consumed by the Asian powers, that is China and India. Now, what US initially did, US basically provided tariffs on India. You had 25% plus 25% tariffs imposed on India. That is 50%. In case of China also, these tariffs have been imposed, right? Now, recently what US has done, US has basically imposed sanctions on the oil companies. Sanctions on the oil companies in Russia, such as you have Rosneft and Lukoil. These are the oil companies which have been facing sanctions. Now, as a consequence of this, they have been unable to provide oil at such a discounted rate. These particular oil companies, the trade is not being carried out. So, in case of China, the trade has been curtailed. The state owned Chinese companies, they are stopping the trade of the seaborne Russian oil. Okay, so you have trade is limited, has been limited. India is also promising that in the coming months, India will curtail the buying of the Russian oil. All this is to starve Russia of the funds, because the argument is as long as Russia keeps on getting the money, it will keep on waging war on Ukraine. And the countries of the world, they want an urgent cessation of this war. But then there are problems. The problems, as in, when we talk about various different countries, they will always buy oil which is cheaper. Now, Russia is an oil rich region. Now, facing sanctions and facing kind of pressure from all sides, Russia, it is estimated, will provide prices, more discounted prices on oil, right? Oil and gas. Now, as Russia does provide more discounted prices, this will attract underdeveloped and developing countries to buy oil, because it will lower the energy cost in those particular countries. And as this happens, Russia gets the war money. Russia gets war money. Okay. So, the newer set of sanctions which have been imposed, now this comes on the back of the Putin Trump meeting, which was supposed to be held in Budapest, but that was called off. And there are various different kind of negotiations that Trump is expected to participate in his Asia tour, which is going to happen very soon in the case of the ASEAN summit, where the Prime Minister of India is not participating in that summit. So, in that case, the article basically is arguing that what will be the efficacy of these new sanctions, because obviously there will be certain loopholes which shall be exploited by Russia and the developing countries as well. So, what needs to be done is take a look at those loopholes, okay, And those loopholes have to be plugged and those loopholes have to be closed. Only then will Russia be forced to a negotiating table. As of now, it is very difficult to bring Russia even on the negotiating table. Okay? Now, after that, coming to certain articles relevant for your prelims, starting with PM Shri signing a tactical decision. That is something which has been said by the Kerala government. The Kerala government has finally agreed to sign on the PM Shri. Now, what is this PM Shri, by the way? And why are multiple different states opposed to it? The non NDA states have always been opposed to it, and majority of them have not signed that. So, PM Shri is basically the Prime Minister's scheme for the School for Rising India, the PM School for Rising India. School for Rising India. That is PM Shri. Now, under this provision, you have the central government will provide funds to the various different states. Some portion is to be ascertained by the central government, some portion by the state government as well. Now, under the central quota of funds, the funds will be provided to the states provided they adhere to the principles of National Education Policy, NEP. Now, the argument is that under the garb of this national education policy, the government at the center is trying to peddle in certain areas where, for example, the non Hindi speaking states, they will be held at a disadvantage. Where under the aspects where you have greater funding provided to Hindi educators, hiring of Hindi educators, and so on. That is why many of the states have been skeptical. But as long as they don't sign this PM Shri and as long as they don't adhere to NEP, they stand to lose the funds provided by the center. The state of Kerala in itself has said that because it was not a part of this PM Shri mission, in 2023-24, it lost out on a sum of close to around 188.58 crores. The center did not give it that much amount of fund. In 2024 to 25, it lost out on close to around 513.54 crores. Now think about it. For a government or for a state like Kerala, particularly in the Department of Education, a sum close to around 700 crores cannot be taken lightly. So that is why Kerala has decided to become a part of this PM Shri. So for your examination, you are required to be aware about what is this PM Shri. So scheme of PM Shri schools is to be implemented as a centrally sponsored scheme with a total project cost estimated to be around 27,360 crores, includes a central share which is 18,000 crores. The time period of implementation 22-23 up till 26-27. Now, what is envisaged under that PM Shri? So, high quality education will be provided, innovative education, for example, bagless days. You have science kits, math kits, which will be provided to the schools as well. You basically will have the green schools, which will be developed, right? The certain model schools will be developed which will provide mentorship to the other schools as well. Environmentally friendly aspects like solar panels, nutrition gardens, farming, waste management, all of that will be inculcated. Focus will be on learning outcomes. So you basically have play, toy based, inquiry driven learning, especially in the foundation years rather than rote learning. So, overall, on the face of it, it seeks to revolutionize the way in which education is being imparted. Okay. Now, then after that, the next article, that is basically the low pressure area of the Tamil Nadu coastline in Bay of Bengal may turn into a cyclone. That has been warned by the Regional Specialized Meteorological Center. So, what happens is when you have a low pressure which develops over a water body, that low pressure can sometimes intensify into a full fledged cyclonic development. So that low pressure is monitored continuously. You have two organizations which are responsible for this. One is the Tropical Cyclone Warning Center, Tropical Cyclone or TCWC, Cyclone Warning Center. So, this Cyclone Warning Center takes a look at the low pressure regions, at the sea surface temperature, and when it exceeds the expected limit, after that, it alerts the Regional Specialized Meteorological Center, RSMC. Across the world, you basically have 6 RSMCs which monitor the water in that region. For example, you have RSMC in Reunion Islands, which takes a look at the cyclonic development in southern Indian Ocean. You have RSMC Tokyo, which takes a look at the cyclonic development in the region of South China Sea and Western Pacific. You have RSMC Miami, which is situated in Florida in eastern US, which takes a look at cyclonic development in the Atlantic. You have RSMC Nadi, which takes a look at the cyclonic development in South Pacific. You have RSMC Honolulu, which takes a look at cyclonic development in Eastern Pacific. Similarly, you have in Northern Indian Ocean, RSMC is situated in New Delhi. That is the RSMC. Now, once the RSMC is tracking this low pressure, after that, basically you have the case where they alert the authorities and they pick a name from the list, a list which is provided by the various different countries, and the cyclone is named. For example, when we talk about the Northern Indian Ocean, this is the list provided by the different countries. So all the names that Bangladesh has provided, that is provided in the list next to Bangladesh, in the row in front of Bangladesh. All the names that India has provided is listed in the row in front of India. Like that, various countries, the list is basically enumerated. A cyclone name is picked up one column after another. The last cyclone that occurred was Cyclone Shakti. Now, this cyclone, if it develops into a full-fledged cyclone, it will be named as Cyclone Montha. Cyclone Montha, the name has been provided by Thailand. Next cyclone which will occur, wherever it will occur, in Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal, will be named as Cyclone Senyar. Next cyclone which will occur, either in Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal, it will be named as Cyclone Detwa. After that, the next cyclone will be named as Cyclone Arnab. After that, Cyclone Murasu. Like that, the naming of the cyclone is basically done. So the cyclone which is going to be developing or which is about to develop off Tamil Nadu coastline will be named as Cyclone Montha. Okay, so this is about the naming of the cyclone and the development of the cyclone as well. Now, Gyan Bharatam mission to ink pact with institutes. Now, this is a mission which has been launched by the Union Ministry, the Union Culture Ministry. Union Culture Ministry. Now, what is it about? So, this is to secure, digitize the various different manuscripts which are available across the country, because we have such a rich cultural and literary heritage. You have multiple manuscripts which are present from north to south, east to west. Now, those manuscripts, they need to be conserved. If that information is to be passed on to the next generation, they need to be preserved, they need to be conserved. Now, in order to do that, the Cultural Ministry has come up with the Gyan Bharatam mission. Now, under this, it comes or it will draw partnership with various different institutions. For example, you have the institutions which have been a part of it, that is Asiatic Society Kolkata, that is a part of it. Asiatic Society Kolkata, University of Kashmir, Srinagar, Hindi Sahitya Sammelan, Prayagraj, and the Government Oriental Manuscript Library, Chennai. So, the union government will partner with these particular institutions in order to digitize the manuscripts which are available for them for better conservation and for safekeeping as well. So that is the aim of the Gyan Bharatam mission. Now here, the funding will be provided by the center. Now, these institutions, they need to have a Gyan Bharatam mission cell. So when we talk about the institutions, they need to have the Gyan Bharatam mission cell. What will be the function of this cell? This will coordinate with the center. Coordinate with center. Central government, obviously. Okay. Now the funding which will be provided. Now this funding, 70% of it will be provided post budget. Right. And the remaining 30% post implementation progress report, which is submitted. Okay. So periodic submission of the progress report is required. Once that is done, only after that, if it is found to be compliant, only after that, you will have the next tranche of funding which will be provided. Now, private sector activity eases to a 5-month low in October as per the PMI survey which is done. Right. Now, PMI survey, that is Purchasing Managers Index. Now, here, basically, it gives you an idea about the health of the economy. Now, this is a survey which is done with the industry leaders in order to gauge an idea about the demand. Now, this PMI survey, the PMI has got number which is enumerated. If the number is greater than 50, that means the economy is expanding. If the PMI is 50, that means the economy is neither expanding nor contracting as it is. If the PMI is less than 50, that means there is contraction. So, the PMI index for October is around 59.9, which is again in an expansive state, but as compared to the previous 5 months, it is slightly lower. What is the reason for the low PMI index? That is owing to the case of weaker demand, and also higher prices, rising output prices. Okay? That is why the PMI index has been slightly tempered, slightly lowered in the month of October. Now, RBI may limit the bank's market exposure. So, RBI basically has proposed a limitation in terms of the bank's lending ability against, when we talk about the capital market, against stocks or bonds, in order to ensure that, let's suppose, you have unscrupulous activities when it comes out in the market, when you talk about the exposure of the banks. Now, the banks have what is known as the tier 1 capital, that is in terms of equity that the bank has. Now, tier 1 capital, the tier 2 capital, that is something which is fixed as per the Basel norms of the banking ecosystem. Now, tier 1 capital is considered to be a safeguard, a kind of if you, in a very simplistic term, if you consider it as a kind of a safe deposit of the banks, that even if the worst crisis comes, that tier 1 capital is something which is used to pay off the lenders. But then, what has been happening for the past few months is there is a lot of population, even in terms of the companies, even in terms of retail investors, who are basically borrowing from the banks and pledging the market shares, the bonds from the capital market. Now, given the volatility of the bond market and even the share market, that means the banks have a larger risk exposure. So, in order to limit that, the RBI has come up with a proposal which will limit the bank's market exposure and their overall lending. This will be implementable on the tier 1 capital of the banks. Capital of banks. Okay. But this is an evolving news story which will develop in the few days, in a couple of weeks. So that is where you can follow it up as well, whether RBI has actually come up with the guidelines for this or not. As of now, it is just a proposal. Now, the last article, US military sends supersonic B-1 bombers off the Venezuela coastline. Now, US military has been flexing its muscles in the region of the Caribbean Sea and pressurizing the region of Venezuela, the country of Venezuela. Now, obviously, you would have seen multiple different videos of US airplanes actually destroying the boats coming off from Venezuela, citing them to be drug boats. It is not a secret that US is not happy with the Nicolas Maduro government in Venezuela. It wants to overturn that. It wants to overthrow that. So that is where the US military has been arming up in the region of the Caribbean Sea. Now you basically have a squadron of F-35 fighters. You had the P-8 Orion aircraft for maritime surveillance. You have the Reaper drones, which are already deployed. Other than that, you had the case where last week B-52 bombers, the heaviest of the bombers, which are, or one of the heavier bombers which are present, the Strato bombers, they also flew across Venezuela coastline in a practice mission. And that is followed by a much more lethal B-1 bombers. B-1 bombers, they can carry more number of bombs within its arsenal as compared to any other plane in the US military. So that is not only a show of strength, but also a warning of the future conflict emerging in the region of Caribbean Sea and the region of Venezuela. So that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion has been beneficial for your overall information. If you have liked the discussion, put that in the comment section below. And don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. We meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.